Hello and welcome to episode 355 of the Crate and Crowbar, a PC gaming podcast being recorded on the 20th of January 2020, only a few hours after the swearing in of a new and vastly improved President of the United States. I'm Marsh Davis, and I'm joined tonight by our very own great experiments, each gone terribly, appallingly awry. I talk of none other than Tom Sr.
Good day, everyone.
And Chris Thurston.
Hi and sorry.
How does it feel to unclench your jaws, maybe just a little, for the first time since 2016?
That's a big question, Marsh. I'll give a stupid answer. I can't. I think I very much actually did feel a little weight lift or something be taken out of the bag you carry around. And obviously the size of the bag and the weight of its contents vary tremendously person to person. And I'm ever conscious of, my the ways in which I'm fortunate in that regard. But as I'm carrying this bag, I was very conscious that I felt happy for my American friends to see at least boring normalcy swan back in, if not something more hopeful. And I thought there were tinges of that. And this was especially heartening as the bucket I live in sank deeper into the sea.
Welcome to the abyss, Chris.
Exactly. But no, I did. I was talking to a friend today about this phenomena and how guarded to be or not. And I think I saw the full span of those reactions on Twitter. And I think in some ways it's a bit like, to continue that analogy, everyone's carrying a whole bunch of different competing, fairly weighty burdens at the moment. And something like this, I don't know how much of that alleviates for the average person, but it does feel like, in addition to whatever else is in my bag, there was a really jangly set of loose screws that made noise every time I moved, and they're finally gone. And that's kind of nice.
How are your screws, Tom?
A little calmer.
Jangly?
They always jangle, but I'm just kind of, I'm trying not to, I felt a twinge of hope and quickly extinguished it. Because, that's...
Get rid of that shit.
Yeah, you just can't be building yourself up like that. And I'm looking forward to the former president lurking on the sidelines like some shit Batman villain, just whipping people up and making things horrible for our friends in America. I
will say, it felt sort of notable. I don't know. I'm not a political commentator and shouldn't be, but it felt notable to have white supremacy named explicitly as a threat in an inauguration speech by an incoming American president. And I think, I may be wrong about this, but I think it was the only human threat named in that context in terms of an adversary. The other sort of challenges that were called out were very much, well, that's not quite true because obviously systemic racism, which is the other side of that coin, is definitely from that same issue. But climate change, the pandemic, etc. I think even in the Obama years, there would be those references to Americans' foreign adversaries and the war on terror and so on. And to see that absent and in its place an acknowledgement of the domestic threat and where that was located, I thought was notable. It was good to see it named for all the talk of unity and the importance of that. And I can agree with the importance of that. To have that tempered by an actual acknowledgement and a naming of the real threat, I thought was good. Podcast voice.
Our enemies are white supremacists and shitty microbes.
Yeah, basically.
And it's like, yeah, right. Yeah. Those are the big problems of the time.
I have to say, though, as a Brit, I am happy and relieved for America, obviously. But as a Brit, I do feel like it's sort of like the end of Thelma and Louise. If Thelma just bailed out of the car before it went off the cliff, and we're left spinning into thin air, going Thelma.
I agree. I had exactly the same conversation with an American friend recently, where I felt like, for 4 years, more or less, starting at the same point, but obviously with the history going back much further, both Britain, the United Kingdom, and America were on this race to discover new bottoms to the barrel, and America has chickened out of that race now. Like pulled its ripcord, called uncle, like they're out of the game, and it's like, I think what this means is we have won, and therefore we can stop playing. And I don't believe that message is quite penetrated yet. You know what I mean? Like we don't need to also go for the record, is what I'm saying. But hey, I don't make the rules.
How about we talk about some less consequential news in the form of video game chat?
Let's do it.
Oh, thank God.
There's been a video game released today.
Wow.
It's Hitman 3. Which is notable, I guess. I haven't played it. Yep.
Neither have
I haven't played the previous one. So,
well, what the people come to us for, opinions about Hitman, fail. What the people don't come to us for, assessments of the state of Western democracy, tick.
Just happy to help.
Yeah, I'm actually really sort of excited about this because last year, the start of my kind of lockdown gaming kind of thing, Hitman 2 and going back through all the levels and playing Hitman 1 through to Hitman 2 all the way at the end was like quite a nice escape at the start of that, because if nothing else, they're like Bond films, sort of holiday media. I don't think they're necessarily advertised as such, but I think Hitman is a series of trips to kind of larger than life, slightly or very much escalated takes on real world places, and where you'd make fire extinguishers fall on people's heads, basically. And I'm actually very excited about this because I also, being completely on the ball of the gaming news, had no idea this was coming so soon, or that it was Epic exclusive, or indeed anything about it. And to see it getting like 90 reviews in places and doing very well, that's nice. It's nice, and there's a game. It's good, isn't it? It's good.
It's kind of the only thing coming out, is it? Right? Like,
yeah,
this is it, right? This is what it's great. And also I like that after some faffing around, apparently that you're going to be able to incorporate Hitman 2 levels into Hitman 3, and you just have a sort of grand old Hitman package of that. I mean, that's hundreds of hours right there.
Grand old package.
Another grand old package.
They do seem to have beefed that up slightly. So this one's Epic exclusive, and they did a blog, I think, when it launched to say that your Steam ownership of Hitman 1 and 2, where it's previously available, would not transfer to this new bundle, this big package. And I think it was PC Games N ran a story about that, and then Tim Sweeney himself responded to say, we didn't want it to be that way, we're looking into it. So I don't know. I think, as long as it's possible, like they kind of fix that retroactively, it's not a huge pain in the ass, but it is a bit of a sort of, it certainly was a little bump in the road of me buying it immediately. Just the fact that I have to load the Epic launcher more than anything else. It's a different button. I don't even have that on my quick bar. How the hell am I supposed to find it?
It's a lot of gigabytes as well. I keep on running into this problem now. I've got a new PC that was supposed to be arriving like right now, but because of the chipset shortages, which is a very first world problem, this thing is probably going to arrive in March or April because of the way that RTX cards are just completely, the supply is so short at the moment. And I was kind of waiting for that. I was going to deploy that on Hitman and see it in all its beautiful glory, because they're beautiful games. The modern Hitman games are gorgeous. Like the environments are beautiful. And that was going to be my whole month. And now I'm just like, oh no.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same boat. I had a new PC at the start of December, and I don't have an ETA. It's gonna arrive when it arrives. I just want it to be in the queue, basically.
Yeah, likewise.
But I also have been putting off a lot of games until that is a thing. And I don't know how wise that's going to be, but we'll see. We'll see. I can sit here and do nothing forever. You'd be surprised.
I look forward to playing Valhalla. I played loads of Valhalla on PS4 Pro, which is very nice. And I'm enjoying the game almost in spite of myself, really, just because it's a very good sort of mop up the map type game, and it's very pretty, if not at all England. So yeah, I was hoping to get that on PC, crank it all up to Ultra, and just sort of like really, just bathe in that Ubisoft detail.
Yeah, I was definitely saving Cyberpunk for the same sort of reasons. Although the good news is that the timeline for the delivery of my PC is exactly as vague as the roadmap that was put out for Cyberpunk's ongoing. I think it's going to be I think I'm going to receive my PC at some point in either the yellow times or the hashed line times, probably before the end of the JPEG. Like anywhere in that span of time is fine. Honestly,
Love that diagram.
I do too.
Yep, I will do the same.
There was another news this week, although I think it was at the end of last week, so obviously it feels like it might have taken place in another century. But it was the news of LucasArts Games. I think that might be the new name, being resurrected, and
It's
a number of
Lucasfilm Games.
Lucasfilm Games. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
And a number of Disney-based collaborations with game studios that had not previously been part of the sort of Star Wars fold or the other Disney properties. Excited in a Star Wars game not made by EA?
Yeah. So that's my noise. Here's what I'd say about this. Star Wars Squadrons was really good. Jedi Fallen Order was pretty good. Like, I liked it quite a lot. I think it's, it's not a From Software game that it quite wanted to be, but it's not far off. And it's probably one of the most concerted efforts by a non-From Software developer to capture that formula and do something else with it. And so the notion that EA is the sole reason that Star Wars games haven't been what people have wanted them to be, I think is meme more than truth. Which is ever the useful distinction. Like my Instagram like recommendation page, whatever you call it, the search page where it just throws whatever it thinks you like, is exclusively Star Wars prequel memes for teenagers because it has accurately assessed my mental age. And and a lot of that lit up with like, ding dong, the witch is dead, EA is gone, thank God Ubisoft are here to deliver a less calculated experience. And I don't think that's wholly the case, as I say, particularly calling reference to the fact that you get Respawn or who is it, EA Montreal, I believe, to do things, and interesting things happen. It just matters who's being asked to make a game, what freedom they're being given to do so. To be honest, that with that in mind, this feels like more existing in sort of continuity with, I think, Disney allowing interesting games to exist again. Famously when Disney got Star Wars, they canned things like Star Wars 1313, which I think was supposed to be a Boba Fett game. And all the other kind of AAA kind of, traditional games of the kind in favor of, and basically said at the time, like, all Disney properties, so from now on, will just be manifesto social games and things like that, because that's where our focus needs to be. And I think that sort of, that is clearly relaxed. You can see that across every part of their handling of their big franchises at the moment. They're obviously allowing weirder things to exist, and that bodes well. In fact, actually, the part of this I find hardest to summon the enthusiasm for is the notion that Ubisoft are making a Star Wars game. I mean, I like plenty of Ubisoft games, but that doesn't tell me anything to be excited about, right? Like,
sure,
it's one of those things. I was again talking to a friend about this the other day. It's good if it's nice. It's nice if it's good. I'll probably play it, but yeah,
they definitely have the resources to deliver a kind of EA level of Star Wars spectacle. I think that's what I really enjoyed about the Battlefront games in particular, is that they looked and sort of sounded incredible, and the second one in particular. And I absolutely hated the card system. Loot boxes were obviously very controversial, but had a really fun single player campaign actually. Just as a kind of Star Wars fan, to just rock through it and enjoy the, that geometry, just rendered in a gorgeous engine, looking amazing. I'm pretty sure Ubisoft could match that. Though I don't want to climb up to the top of a Wookie in sync.
Yeah, exactly.
To reveal an area. So I don't know how this fits into one of Ubisoft's templates, but I'll be fascinated to see. It's quite exciting.
What animatronic Star Wars creature would be the replacement of your eagle/crow?
Oh, just a giant jumping rancor. Sort of belly flopping his way across the landscape.
Or Minoc, maybe. Yeah, I think so. Here's an interesting thing. I think one of the reasons that EA was able to do some interesting things with Star Wars more recently, this is a bit of a guess, but DICE did a lot of work to basically create like a big library of very, very good cinema referenced Star Wars assets. Now I'm going to go off on one of my boring tangents here about why project management is interesting, but like clearly, like once they had like probably some of the best 3D models of AT-ATs and snowspeeders and X-wings in the business, that becomes like a little toolkit to go away and make games with. And I wonder if that stuff will get shared, because I feel like
sure it would.
but if it's kind of interesting at that point, because that's labor that has been done by EA basically.
Yeah, who owns it is
who
the
owns
interesting
that?
thing.
Yeah, it is interesting, or is it?
Yes.
And
I wonder how many of, for example, the Mandalorian's CG assets are actually borrowed from games. I suspect some, at least.
I mean, the Mando.
It's using the Unreal Engine.
Unreal Engine, yeah. So kind of maybe they should start Lucas Game Films in order to fully take advantage of that. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Really enjoyed The Mandalorian. It was
good, isn't it?
Yeah, I really like it, and it's kind of it's sliding more and more into kind of extended universe stuff, but it's still great. It's great. It's so well produced. It's beautiful.
It's so This is a tangent, but I think this is the other thing that will be interesting about what comes next for the games is which audience are they going to chase? Because Squadrons was a sign that they were willing to chase a nostalgic audience. And I think I've said this before on the podcast, but I feel like the story of like big franchise pop culture over the last couple of years is going from the assumption that you can't and maybe shouldn't, or the notion that giving fans exactly what they want is complicated and that you must complicate it in the telling of your stories. You shouldn't just deliver on expectations. And maybe through a combination of like extensive backlash and culture war and angry nerds, you end up in a situation where we sort of are at a point now, it's like, no, actually you can just have what you want, but we're going to try and do it in at least a relatively classy way. And I think the remarkable thing about Mandalorian Season 2 is that it manages to be quite a good watchable show, while also pulling like triple duty as a sequel to the Dave Filoni cartoons, as a engine by which things from the 90s that millennials and young Gen Xers care about get reintroduced to Star Wars canon, and basically an apology in making for the Rise of Skywalker, as far as I can tell, in terms of plot threads is setting up in order to explain glaring plot holes. And like the weird thing about Star Wars is how inevitably meta it ends up becoming, particularly when you don't just wipe the slate clean and say this is for a new audience. And the games ping pong between those extremes. Oh no, and the hot take police close in. I will end on this. I think that's going to be the most important kind of signifier, is like, what decision are they making? Are they trying to make something to call back to the history of Star Wars games? If so, they'll certainly please old fans. And if they do it well, then it's nice to reintroduce that to a new audience. Or is it this sort of like dogged march into the future, at which point I feel like that's a good thing, but they're not going to lose the moaning. It's just that the focus of that ire will become more dispersed.
Yeah.
Jon Favreau is a wizard, I think.
Yeah, I think
he's done exactly as you say. He's done a remarkable job of pulling this thing along, despite many competing directions it could have gone in, and somehow I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, and I never felt like it obtrusively pandered to an audience that was obviously not me, and it was. So they did a good job of concealing all that pandering that it was doing, which is great.
It's a title concept artist's playground, that show as well. Like every single base they fly over, the ships just incidentally fly in the background. All of it is just, as a sci-fi nerd, it's like, oh, look at that.
I'll say this as well. Like, I went back and watched little bits of The Force Awakens recently, which makes it about a year and a half since I'd seen it. And I think post Mandalorian, it really shows up. I think the sequels generally, although I love The Last Jedi, but that movie particularly, as being like both quite anodyne in its designs and its production design, and also it really showcases what I would call like J.J. Abrams' specific lack of a sense of space or the continuity between spaces. Like every action sequence he produces tends to be like a cool visual idea in a container that can contain that thing with no real relationship to the thing that happens next or that happened before it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's striking about the Mandalorian is like it articulates, there's change it, it articulates lots of different, it can go through lots of different sort of like episodic feeling moods and themes, but it kind of articulates an interesting universe between all of them, and that is better, is what I'm saying. It's better than the previous thing.
They did good instead.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
More.
That's TV.
They've also announced that Indiana Jones will be given to Machine Games, formerly of the Wolfenstein remakes, which I think is a really interesting pairing. I mean, there's some consternation that Machine Games, a studio most recently known for making a shooter game, would be too shootery for Indiana Jones. But I don't know. I think that they have a greater hinterland than simply the FPS. I think that because they are, a lot of them came from the studio that Starbreeze at a time when it was making the Chronicles of Riddick, and that's a game which is also a shooter but has a lot of breadth to it. And I wonder what they will do with this. I think one of the things that I'd be concerned about with any adaptation or even continuation of Indiana Jones is that, having recently rewatched the first one, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that which is it cannot be totally excused for harking back to the cinema of yesteryear. There's a lot of caricaturish depictions of other nations, and obviously the entire thing of it is that Indiana Jones is stealing other nations' treasures, which is a thing that kind of goes unaddressed. And also, he's a paedophile, which isn't great. So I think if any studio was going to look at something problematic and find some way of making that interesting or saying something interesting about it, it might be Machine Games, whose attempt at the Wolfenstein series does a lot to rehabilitate what was quite a stupid shooter and put a lot of heart and progressive thought into it.
It's strange for them to pick up it's strange to see people making games based on movies that are just totally unmoored from the kind of movie release schedule. Like, as far as I'm aware, there isn't a new Indiana Jones in production in
there
cinema.
is.
Oh, is there?
Well, I mean, I don't know how far along in production it is, but Harrison Ford he's agreed to play Indy for another time. I know.
Good. I'm looking forward to see. I mean, Harrison Ford's great, but the man's melted. He's too melted to be Indy these days, I think. That's very mean. But this doesn't seem to be like a tie-in to that particular movie. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I guess we just don't know what the actual kind of premise is. We don't even know if it's going to be first person, third person, whatever type of game it's going to be.
I tell you what, though, having watched the first film again, there's a sequence in it in which, quite a lengthy sequence in which Indiana Jones is sort of open world roaming, but in stealth, through a dig site in Egypt. And during that time, he has to go undetected by the Nazis and also beat them to the sort of discoveries that they're searching for in the wrong place. Disguising himself as workers and diving through tents and generally keeping out of the way. I was thinking, well, if you're looking for another set of verbs to replace simply gunning down hundreds and hundreds of Nazis, then actually a sort of Hitman-ish open world stealth is a pretty good fit for that section.
Be an interesting way of differentiating it from every other game series heavily inspired by Indiana Jones as well, because that feels like the elephant in the room. It's like the world isn't in want of games about that fantasy. And actually, indeed, the last time I think we spoke about it on the podcast was that time we really put September 2018 to rights or whatever it was, and talked about Tomb Raider and WoW's kind of matinee adventure outing and so on. And there's obviously Uncharted and all the rest of it. And it's weird that there's like an Uncharted movie on the way at the same time as Indie kind of returns as a game. And so I think one of the big questions is that, like, what do you... I'm not saying that like Tomb Raider is the way to, or Uncharted is the way to kind of enact, Indiana Jones caper in a game. But there does seem to be some consensus about what that means. And so, is it open world stealth? Is it more of a shooter? Because they could do that. Like, you say it's not the sum total of those movies, but he does shoot a lot of Nazis. There are a lot of running action sequences in those films that could be done in the machine game style. Maybe not quite Wolfenstein, but something like that.
Yeah.
And in any case, I think one of the ways, possibly even the only avenue they have to try and negotiate some of the inevitable problems with that setting is to lean real hard into the Nazis, basically. Like, Indy can't be the most, the worst person in the room. In this room.
Indiana Jones is kind of a weird relationship with games, because basically that's Tomb Raider is basically Indiana Jones, and then Uncharted was like, oh, we're just going to do Tomb Raider for the modern era, and all of it is Indiana Jones. So yeah, do you want to make it the same game again, or
right, or make
with
Fate of Atlantis?
Which is, I love Fate of Atlantis. That was a really nice adventure game, and that will never happen. But it's just don't know. Just thoughts, really. Just pieces out.
The machine games kind of like Starbreeze, Stardock. Which one is
Starbreeze?
Starbreeze Legacy is, I think, in really like kind of physically interactive environments. Like, they've always been really good at a sense of place and a sense of kind of, and I think that would be something to see brought to bear in those kinds of contexts, particularly.
They feel very popular social environments as well. You go around talking to lots of people, and the interactions you have with them feel very credible in the Chronicles of Riddick games.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's the way to get away from the Tomb Raider thing a bit. Like, not contraption-filled tombs, but, the, like you say, the slightly more people being the challenge, I guess, rather than pushing blocks around to open big doors. I don't know. Like Tom, just don't know.
Yeah.
It's good if it's nice.
It's nice if it's good. Oy, that should be our podcast catchphrase, but it shouldn't. What have you been playing, Chris?
Oh boy. Well, so it's been like, I guess, more than a month since I've done a podcast. And in that time, I thought about playing some different things. Well, I will say this. I did play... I played games where you make run after run in an attempt to reach the apex of a fantasy underworld, gradually accruing power, but strictly at a rate established by the developers, while effectively adorning my character with new abilities. And this game is called World of Warcraft. A little third act switcheroo there. I have also played Hades, but finally, WoW has become, and I didn't expect this, and particularly after what I had to say about it last time, like, just the game I play now. And I don't think everything I have to say about it, and I don't want to go mega deep on this more than make a few points about where it's at, but like, everything I have to say about it is to do with, like, I think the role it can play in your life, rather than trying to offer some grand verdict on World of Warcraft as a game, because it's a fairly unique thing. There are obviously other long-running MMOs, but Shadowlands, the new expansion, when it came out, was the biggest PC release of all time until Cyberpunk eclipsed it like a month later. And so it's this massive active theme park, basically, that has been continuously added to and evolved for the better part of almost 2 decades now, that just sort of sits there at the periphery of this kind of hobby we have, accumulating content and kind of drawing people in. And I find it, having sort of bounced off its previous expansion, which the new experience funnels you into, as hard as I did, and obviously I talked about that on a previous podcast, I did end up persevering with it and spent a good couple of weeks just plowing away through an entire the previous expansion's worth of content, all of it, including all of the post-launch content, this sort of endless Saturday morning cartoon, which I liked a lot more, of places to go and stuff to collect, and a game that was never really a challenge, just this sort of endless like funnel of like activities and new things to see and little cutscenes to uncover and things to unlock from a character and looks to unlock that I found kind of enormously comforting. It's like the ultimate sort of switching off game. And I say that guardedly because I'm also the kind of human being who is capable of just like eating an entire bag of hobnobs at once. And I wouldn't necessarily say that that is like, I think that says more about me than it does about hobnobs. And I think that is also true here. So I'm finding it hard to kind of pass the critical judgment here because like, is any of WoW's like writing or art or content like individually like spectacular or noteworthy, or I would point to? No. Is quantity a form of quality? Kinda. And like, there's something really sort of, I guess, comforting about being kind of sucked away into something quite so kind of rich and full featured and drunk on its own supply in some cases, but very much sort of laid out for you. And I think it is, and I'll talk separately about the new expansion, which I think is good. It is in its own way a clicker game, really. You know, it's the same as the sorts of games that Pip gets a lot out of as well. It's a sort of set of activities that you tee up for yourself. And I think the quality of the status quo at any given time is how compelling are the Skinner boxes that I'm engaging in today. And I think we're kind of past the point of poo-pooing that as like not game design, because it's been years, people love this stuff, it's game design. Like, and so if, you know, how aesthetically and compelling is the current array of little tasks laid out for me to do every day, and how interested am I in the rewards. And WoW is like supremely over featured in that regard, so much so that it becomes fun. It's fun to, you know, dig into the new stuff and have new things unlock every week and go and find them. It's fun to jump into an old raid that was designed for 25 people with one other friend and blitz through it because you're massively over leveled and unlock a bunch of new, what would have previously been endgame stuff, mounts and armor and things that you can just put on your new character and transmogrify and use to build outfits. Like, that's fun too. And I think it's really highlighted to me, and this is something that has been a side effect of this change in my kind of idle gaming, it's really highlighted to me Destiny's particular struggles. And it's particularly highlighted to me, I think, how valuable the subscription model still is. It feels like the notion that you pay to keep game servers on feels like that's gone, right? No one is expecting to have to pay for that anymore. But, you know, the $10 a month that WoW costs, once you've paid that, there's basically nothing in the microtransaction store. There's like 14 mounts, like which is nothing, because there's probably more than 14 items on a given page of Destiny's store. And what that means is that the game is full of weird rewards. If you see someone with a cool hat, you can say, "Where did you get that hat?" And they will say, "I got it by doing this dungeon, and it was hard." And you go, "Cool, maybe I could do that." And then maybe you do. And that generosity of just stuff is a consequence of basically developers being paid another way. And that's really important, because the reason you invest in these games is to accrue a big pile of cool things that you have momentarily invested value in. Does that mean that they have value independently? I don't know. Is the whole thing possibly a big old kind of sink to put your brain in when the outside is yelling? Maybe. But like, it really did. It highlighted the paucity of content in Destiny, a game I otherwise love, in quite an unflattering way, and meant that I find Destiny hard to go back to now because it feels so thin.
Oh, wow.
Despite its core loop, the combat and its narrative being, I think, much better. That said, the thing I would say is that the new WoW expansion is genuinely really cool. It takes place in the sort of afterlife, and there's a bunch of different big themed afterlives, and none of them strike me as like wildly problematic, which means they've hurdled the bar that I kind of set for them after the previous expansion. So good job. That's guarded, if that wasn't clear. But also, like, there's some cool ideas in it, and there's tons of really interesting kind of little places to go and little mini experiences that are fun to dig into. Like, WoW has like a baked-in roguelike now, which is called Torghast, the Tower of the Damned, and you enter it, and you in a given run, you gain powers and ability modifiers that fundamentally change how your character works in kind of really interesting ways that tickle all of the things that normally tickle people about like ability set accruing roguelike type games, like say the Spire or Dead Cells or Hades even. Where you build a really broken version of your character, you're trying to get to the end, and you unlock some rewards. And the broader kind of thing it plugs into is WoW's endlessly grindy end game. But in and of itself, it's a really fun little thing to do. And like this last week, they had like a weekly timed set of new abilities that would be in the tower for like a limited amount of time. So you could go in, and it was all about pets, beasts from hell. And I did a run where I respect my demon hunter to be a tank, and I ended up tanking for a dog that just by being alive would die. And whenever it died, it would detonate, doing several hundred times its own health and damage. Sorry, no, several times all of its health and damage. And I kept buffing its health, but not buff it, and then buffing the speed at which it died inevitably, and created this bizarre game loop where my job went from trying to damage things myself to trying to stay alive so that my exploding dog could die enough time to kill everything in the level. Which is like genuinely fun. It's one of those little stories, like, and it's interesting to get that experience out of WoW, which is like in no other circumstances a game I would recommend to Tom Francis. But that little story is like has a germ of like, I don't know, Franciscan mechanics wang in it that might be, like is nice to find in a game like this. And the point of these things is not that they are like self-sustaining game loops. Although I do think I'm into WoW's endgame now, and I do think there's something really interesting about the structures they've created for endgame content, and there is a real skill to getting good at it, etc. But the point is that like it just becomes this big toy box of little experiences you can dip into with your friends or on your own that you come out with a nice little reward. And I found that very comforting, if otherwise possibly not critically like thought-provoking. And I appreciate I'm saying that after having spoken about it unbroken for what feels like half an hour.
No, it's interesting. I think those are the kind of games I'm gravitating towards at the moment because I think our mental space communally has been taken up elsewhere.
Yeah.
How did you experience it as a kind of social experience, Chris? Did you kind of solo it, or were you kind of
very solo? Yeah, and I think I went a bit mad as well because like, so they've really sped up leveling, and that's very sensible of them. So it takes about probably between 16 and 20 hours to get to level 50, which is the cap if you don't have the latest expansion. That's the cap if you just pay the monthly fee, basically, because it's not free to play because it's like free up to level 20, which is nothing. But you can pay the monthly fee, and then you don't have to buy any of the previous expansions or the core game or anything like that. So you pay the monthly fee, you can go up to level 50, and that takes about 20 hours ish. Then you can pick which expansion you want to do it in, and with the time phasing thing, which is really cool. And then you jump into the new expansion, and the new expansion is about another 10, 12 hours to get to the new camp of 60. But I got to level 50, bought the new expansion so that I could keep gaining experience, but refused to go to the new expansion, and instead stayed in the one I was doing and just did absolutely everything. When you're already at the level cap, you only gain like 150 XP for completing a quest. And it's like 190,000 XP to get to level 51. I managed to get to level 51 just by doing quests that gave me 150 XP and discovering new areas that gives you about 700 over the course of about 2 weeks by myself, while one-shotting every mob because I was over-leveled for it. Just because I wanted to see the daft Saturday morning cartoon endless fucking Burning Legion storyline come to an end. So I played through what was effectively 2 years of post-launch content for the Legion expansion. And that was like, I did that mostly by myself, and it took about 40 hours. And that happened to me. And it now feels like a blur, even though it was about 5 weeks ago. And it's probably one of the purest. This is the thing. I feel like a lot of our lives is spent figuring out that this wasn't a waste of time. And by this, I mean, I'm gesturing at all of it. And so that's my biggest test yet, really went for it, and I don't regret it. It's like I either really wasted 2 weeks, or I got to the heart of what video games are, which is a series of colorful lights and mild challenges that make you feel better for a short amount of time, and you get to see a big purple man annihilate a chandelier with his eye beams at the end. It's quite striking.
It's the third lockdown, and
Yeah.
it's the worst one. So I think like everyone could be forgiven for jumping into a 2-decade-old MMO every now and then just to sort
I
of
live
soak it
here
up.
now. Yeah, someone reminded me that like every time I talk about it in public, someone will say the words either Guild Wars 2 or Final Fantasy 14, which I think are both fine things to say to me. But now I feel somewhat protective of my trash, my mass market, enormously profitable trash.
No, sir, that is not the debasement that I seek.
Exactly. I want a cold box of chicken nuggets and to hide under the bed. And that's what I found. And I also played Hades, which I thought was pretty good.
You said a podcast ago that you feared Hades because you were worried that it was going to essentially put all progress in a sort of inevitable meta progression, and you would find that unsatisfying.
Yeah, I was right, wasn't I?
Okay.
So I really admire a lot about Hades, particularly the art and the design and the music and the combat system. Like, it's all very slick. I think it's probably Supergiant's best game on the whole. Like, it combines all the things they're good at and levels them all up at the same time, which is exciting because I think their games have been inconsistent in that regard, right? The latest one isn't necessarily the best in every category. I think it probably is. However, I think maybe related to the previous thing, like, it did start to feel like a job as soon as I realized what I was actually being asked to do. As soon as I realized that it wasn't necessarily about becoming an ace at the combat system. Well, as soon as I realized that my sort of slow, steady improvements of the combat system, which I do like, were being outpaced in terms of their effect on my progress by just stuff I was unlocking based on time more than anything else. It's funny because it's so similar to WoW in that regard. It's so similar to any MMO or any clicker game where your just steady engagement is the thing that it wants and that it rewards. And it rewards you with, rule art. Very, very shippable gods. Just fucking hella shippable. Like everyone horny, but in a sort of classy way.
I don't know, you've not seen some of the slash fiction I have.
Well, not yet. I've been avoiding spoilers. And is that bad? No, it's not. Is it a crime that the game engaged me with tricks? I don't know. Probably not. I guess what I mean is, I think, but I did sort of get this feeling where it was like, I didn't want to go down the road laid out in front of me all the way to the end. I kind of just wanted to see all of the things and then finish it. And that's obviously obviously they account for that. You've got the God mode thing, which kind of allows you to cruise through to the end in that way. That has a fight with the part of my brain that demands to do things the, I don't know, quote unquote proper way. I feel like all of these little issues or these little snags with game design kind of expose unresolvable arguments rather than actual problems about what is the correct way to correct quote unquote way to appreciate something that is simply there to furnish you with a nice time and isn't trying to hurt you.
They've done a good job of catering to lots of different playstyles. I mean, the sort of the John Favreau, if you will, of game design.
Yeah, frictionless and doesn't annoy the Snyderverse people.
I mean, I bounced off it for the same reason that you did. That I feel I don't know whether this is just because I think about games design more than I should when I play a game, but that makes me sound so that's the most conceited sounding humble brag I've ever made. Or maybe I'm just too brilliant for it. But I feel like I'm super sensitive to whenever the cadence of progress is being set externally to my individual improvement as a player. which I feel very strongly is the case with Hades. Like, I mean, you're just going to be destroyed basically at different points during your progress, and then you just won't take the same amount of damage the next time you do it, and so you'll pass it. I know that's true of a lot of games, but I think other games it's disguised better, or there are other things that you are learning and absorbing along the way. Whereas I feel Hades, there's more repetition than there is learning. I think
maybe that's the thing. I think maybe it's about, this is a bit of an arch point, so forgive me, but maybe it's like there's a sort of little contradiction in the amount of respect it appears to be showing you as a player with agency at any given time. It's like it trusts you to invest in and appreciate and read between the lines of its art and writing, while also kind of ushering you along in a kind of constrained way through the game itself, which is probably a really, really good balance to strike. Whereas, but I think there's like a slight friction there, which can create it can create the sense that both things are somewhat illusory. I think that you're almost being duped into like it, which I think I was saying earlier. It's a bit like this. WoW is McDonald's. It kind of knows what it is, I think, right? And when you're in there by yourself, wearing a hoodie and staring into nothingness, you know you're in the void. You opted for it. These are your cold chicken nuggets.
You just want a grey little puck of salty meat.
Yeah. Whereas Hades is like pret-a-manger.
Yeah.
It is better for you. It is materially better for you. But it has the same parent company. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the point's necessarily going. Like, I don't know. It's really good. I can understand why it did as well as it did. I felt like, maybe this is it. I felt like I knew what it was doing to me, and it didn't want me to know. Whereas I don't think WoW cares that I know. I think WoW is letting me roll around in the trash, whereas Hades is like holding my hair back as I vomit into the loot. Like, I don't know. I'm losing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's almost exactly what I'd say in comparison to it in Spelunky. Is that Spelunky also doesn't care at all for you as a player, it seems. And although I'm never going to get very far in Spelunky, and I've stopped playing Spelunky 2 now pretty quickly. Like, I kind of like it more, or at least I admire it more for that honesty. I don't know. But, I have no chance of ever completing it, whereas I probably do have a good chance of completing Hades if I bothered to put in the time. But for some reason, it's less appealing to me.
I genuinely think it's such an interesting design thing, because I think it's a question of agency. I think it's a question of how much freedom does the player have to determine their own level of success? I think that's fairly, like, I don't think that is like a general rule for whether a game is good or not, but I think it helps you triangulate what kind of game it is that you're playing. And that illusion can be a tricky one to manage. And it's like, does the game break when that illusion is shattered? And I don't think it does in Hades' case, but I think it has a slightly uncomfortable relationship with the genre that it sits in and some of the expectations that come with that. Whereas, for example, in World of Warcraft, this is an example, started getting into it to the extent that I installed some add-ons to let me see like the damage that everybody's doing. I'm playing a DPS class most of the time, so you want to see how much damage you can kind of squeeze out. And some of those basically forms a leaderboard, and some of that is obviously determined by the current meta and a little bit of personal ability. But one thing you notice is that across a span of playstyles, across the different classes, the DPS averages out in about the same place. And that's quite an impressive design feat, because it means that they are calculating, they're finding ways to get very, very disparate playstyles and ways of doing damage to basically have the same effect in game. They're effectively flattening player agency by saying it doesn't matter what you pick. What you pick will affect what buttons you press, but the output of pressing those buttons will be the same. And when that happens, it's tempting to sort of like feel that that your player agency means less, because it actually does. And then you have to kind of recalibrate it around like, well, I guess all I'm doing is I'm theming this experience. I am making some aesthetic choices around a broader experience that I'll be having, and a few gameplay ones. And I think that's fine, but it's interesting to me the relationship that has with agency, particularly as you would consider it in other kinds of RPGs like Elder Scrolls RPGs or CRPGs, where you desperately want those kinds of decisions to actually matter beneath the hood. Whereas that service game mindset that I think Hades shares requires that those decisions not hurt you, and not, it requires that you not be allowed to accidentally set yourself back in some permanent way. And that has a tricky relationship with, I think, the core promise of a roguelike. That I've run out of track to put in front of this train now, so off the cliff I go. Thelma!
Thelma!
Famously, a train at the end of that film.
Tom, what have you been playing?
I've been playing Remnant from the Ashes.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a bit of a sleeper hit from 2020, actually. And if you want a co-op game where you just sort of pay once and then have a really nice campaign, this is great. It's really strong. It's really weird third-person shooter where you team up to shoot loads of zombies in an admittedly extremely brown universe. But one of the first weapons I got fired incendiary rounds, and then once I powered it up, it doubles as a flamethrower whenever I wanted to, and that's a cool weapon just to have at the very start of the game. And there are kind of just loads of like leveling options. It's just like, what if the Division was sort of declassified and kind of wrapped in a bit of kind of
heresy.
I was about to say Niles Barkley. What I mean is Clive Barker.
More or less the same.
Very,
Niles
very,
Barkley's Jericho.
I like how I stopped myself from saying it and I just said it anyway. So.
You should have done it.
So it's all kind of just, horrible, bloody, fleshy monsters that you sort of carve up with delicious weapons. And it's got little dungeons that you dive into. It's deeply strange. It's taken early from Dark Souls book in the sense that everyone just sort of talks cryptic nonsense at you. And there's obviously some sort of like enormous occult underpinning to the whole thing that you can't really figure out because you're too busy shooting zombies all the time, which is fine by me. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of like throw it out there. If people are looking for games to play with pals, and obviously like, Hunt Showdown is the creme de la creme. But if you're looking for something a bit sillier and a bit more kind of like, a bit quicker and with lots more shooting, then Remnant is really strong. And I think its final expansion came out last year, so you could probably get the whole lot for not a huge amount of money on Steam. It's good. I like it.
Sounds interesting. Dark Souls with guns is how I've heard it pitched to me previously.
It's basically right. Yeah, that's the reasonable way of putting it. It's kind of, it borrows a lot from like Dark Souls, The Division, from loads of different games, but somehow like its trappings and its art style and the whole vibe of the thing is its own thing. It's got its own identity, even though it's quite derivative mechanically. And I think for that reason, it's more memorable than lots of games that try to do this. And I think like a sequel, I don't know how well it's done, but like a sequel could easily build on that, and it could become something quite important actually, as a kind of almost like an alternative to Warframe is what I would say.
Ooh, right.
So the games you compared to it, is it like Dark Souls in structure, i.e. it's an RPG with an end, or is it like a MMO? Because that's the thing I've always been unsure about.
It's basically an RPG with an end, but it's got, but it has like instance dungeons and that sort of thing, but with an overworld as well. So it feels like an MMO at points where you're sort of like exploring and there are puzzles in the environment, but then the actual kind of important story points happen in dungeons. That's where you fight the biggest bosses and stuff like that. So it's got a kind of MMO structure, but it is basically a linear RPG ultimately.
There was a VR prequel that is now released in non-VR form, called Chronos Before the Ashes, I think. Which, if you like, is sort of a Dark Souls with guns without guns, because it's set in a fantasy universe, which is obviously the same universe but just earlier.
They call it the past. What a concept!
The strange
Dark Souls
of these new times,
but with guns, but without guns, and in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Set in the future, but backwards.
It's a third-person VR game. Weirdly, which you can play without VR. So it's just a third-person game now. But I'm interested to know if you'd if you'd played it in VR, because I have a hard time conceiving of what a third-person VR game would feel like.
I've not played it in VR actually. Folks should scroll through the podcast archive and listen to the latest interview I did with Christian Donlan, who recommended Chronos. Actually, that's one of his first recommendations as a really cool, interesting VR game to play.
I knew I'd heard about it somewhere. Jesus.
And I had no idea what it was. I had no idea it was tied to Remnant. That's wild. Now I've got to play that now. But yeah, he re-recommended it. He re-rated it, actually. And I have played third-person games in VR, and it's never felt quite right to me. It feels like the person you're controlling is tiny. In my experience, like they're just about 6 inches tall, and you're going through a tiny little world. And it's something weird to do with the perspective, I think, or maybe that's just me, my brain. I'm not sure.
It's funny that the subtitle From the Ashes is so vague that even when it was literally used on 2 different games, you didn't realise that they were part of the same series.
Yeah,
it's the prequel, generic. Brian Lara 96 From the Ashes.
It's good crack for a lockdown game. That's kind of like my mode at the moment. I mean, I've been playing Lego games as well. Just because I could listen to a comedy podcast and sort of mop up Lego bits for no reason. And then press a button and become a big plastic Incredible Hulk. And it's like, yeah, all right, that's fine. That's all I can really deal with.
That is the exact spirit in which I'm playing World of Warcraft. So
yeah, right.
I'm with you.
We're in the same place.
Marsh, how are you comforting yourself?
Well, it's interesting to compare because I've been playing 2 games. The first one, which is very apt for this particular day, is Suzerain, which is a presidential simulation / visual novel in which you ascend to power in a fictional 1950s era state. And I think it's probably really, really good, but I just haven't been in the kind of headspace to receive something requiring of any amount of attention whatsoever. I mean, for example, Graham Smith, also of this podcast, and I have apparently signed a death pact to watch all of the Fast and Furious movies in sequence. And that's really sort of maxing out my intellectual capacity at the moment. So the idea of, I don't know, setting fiscal policy for a state emerging from the rulership of a military junta and somehow chaperoning it into an era of modernity and globalism, it's a little bit too much of a stretch for me right now. But I think if I was even able to focus on anything for more than 30 seconds at a time, I think I'd still find it pretty intimidating because it's not quite like Crusader Kings level of granularity. It's much more on the visual novel end of that spectrum. But there are quite a lot of levers to pull nonetheless, and there's quite a lot of things to keep track of. And this is like a fictional country in a fictional equivalent of Europe, and you have to get up to speed with that context really quickly. And the details of that fiction are really significant. It's like, I mean, I don't know if it's as big, but it's certainly as considered a fiction as, say, that of Disco Elysium. You know, there's a lot going on there. And except instead of being just a useless piece of shit, drunk ass sorry cop who isn't even in charge of his own bodily functions, you are in charge of an entire country, and it's quite a lot to take in. But it does a good job of onboarding you, I think, and the choices you're presented with feel pretty well contextualized on the whole. I don't know. You've played more strategy games than I have, both of you actually, but particularly Tom. I wanted to sort of get your take on this, but there's a little preamble to my question, but there's a few moments where you sort of make these binary choices with seemingly little information, and sometimes these feel quite irritating because you immediately discover that there's some sort of corollary to your choice that would have made it unattractive. And because it's a video game, every choice just you know that the chickens will come home to roost in some way as a result of it. All the choices just have this potent chicken-based foreboding. I don't know if I don't know how symmetric those decisions are yet, and this is my big problem. Would be my big problem with it if it manifests, and my frustration with sort of the gamification of politics in general, because to my mind, in reality, policy isn't like this symmetrical choice where everything has upsides and downsides, and if you do the right thing, there's going to be a sting in the tail. I mean, obviously, good government is difficult, and there are drawbacks to do good things. But actually, the path to progress and morality isn't sort of a coin toss between two completely opaque futures. There are lots of obvious things that we could do to make the world better, and the primary reason we haven't is because it's opposed by a large number of absolute cunts who just want more for themselves. And to Suzerain's credit, it does present you don't have to play it progressively, but it presents progress as being primarily complicated by having to appease regressive factions. And this is the 1950s in this fictional world. So it does, but it shares the mores of the 1950s in our world. So it's very much more conservative world from the off. But nonetheless, I feel like there's been at least a couple of moments where the choices have been sort of artificially constrained to sort of pit ideals against each other. Like, oh, you need to make a choice which benefits the needs of the poor, or will you do this thing which reverses the recession and get the economy out of the shit? And yeah, I mean, obviously in government you do need to thread the needle, and there's worthy causes always need to be juggled. But I feel like here, because it's a game, it does this thing of kind of forcing you to make these kind of particularly painful choices, particularly difficult choices. And so here's my question that I said I was going to ask you and then didn't for ages. Sorry. Is the vector for these sorts of politics, simulation, governance games, is the vector for them feeling more true to life simply complexity? Are there games that feel more true without being just wildly complicated and granular?
Yes, Frostpunk.
Oh,
that's a game that does this extremely well, and every choice you make is a bad choice in some way, and I think that's kind of true of policy. Like, all policy is flawed in some way. It always it benefits some people, but it always has problems. It's always imperfect because human systems are imperfect. And if you thrust that into a bitterly cold survival situation like Frostpunk, it's enthralling, and those decisions really matter, and they almost behave like skill trees, which I much prefer to the typical approach, where like a lot of these kind of binary choices that you see pop up in like Total War or a lot of strategy games, they're also just kind of resource choices. It kind of pretends to be a moral choice, but actually you'll get extra points in this bracket instead of this bracket for doing this thing. And so actually kind of robs it of any real kind of weight, emotional weight, or sense of consequence. And that's one of the reasons why Frostpunk is really, really good, because it actually presents choices and they feel real.
It sounds too grim, though.
Oh, it's really fucking grim. Good though.
It's great though. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'd like to add a corollary to that if I can, which is, I think the problem with politics games is they tend to be about pursuing endings and win states of some kind, and that is not how the world works at all. The good thing about Frostpunk is it's kind of enclosing fiction, and its fantasy does allow that to exist in a very tangible, very practical way. Your decisions have this physical effect on the environment in terms of how hot and cold it is, who gets to sleep in a warm house and who doesn't, and what that means to your society. And it's self-contained as a scenario, so that there's really clear cause and effect, and there is indeed an end. You want to get to the end of this winter, and you will either do that or you will freeze. And that means that your policies really can boil down in some ways, whereas real politics is not about that. And in fact, often the summoning of kind of like goals and endings, the notion of endings, the notion of goals, the notion of end states that could be reached is deeply political, and almost always a complete fucking lie, basically. Like, it's more true, I think, to say that politics is the enaction of values rather than the pursuit of goals. And, I think setting goals is certainly a part of that, but the notion of like one day attaining a kind of utopian state is probably less helpful than figuring out what values you need to have in order to make proper decisions, like make the best possible decisions you can make day on day. And so, when you have, so my argument would be that there probably aren't perfect answers to most questions, but if the decisions are being made out of a set of good values, like, respect for every human being, etc., equality of every kind, then the daily enactment of those values will at least move things in possibly the best direction given what's possible at the time. And then the role of like activism and more radical sides of political thought is to pull that, encourage that value set to grow and expand and to elevate people whose voices would not otherwise be heard. The games are about goals, and I think it's kind of incompatible with that. Like, games would never be happy to say, well, you act, even though when you make a choice in a game, you traditionally make it based on your values. The frustration comes from the fact that, like, I made the choice based on my values, but I knew that the game was going to use this to, upset my long-term goal in some way, because that's about what the game is inevitably about. So yeah, I enact universal basic income, but inexplicably the International Space Station explodes or something, and I have to and that trade-off is both unrealistic and I think not where the actual tension of enacting political choices actually comes from, which is more about like the establishing of values and actually and disseminating those values and dealing with bad actors who don't act on the basis of some broader ideal, but out of self-interest or some other kind of manipulative thing. I did an interesting live game, forgot what it's called, mega game at the Shut Up and Sit Down Expo last year, when there was one, obviously not last year, 2019, which was a simulation of like the American congressional politics, basically. So players were divided up into teams and representing the various different sort of congressional bodies, and effectively scored in this labyrinthine way about like who could get resolutions passed and what kind of political keywords were being pushed around. It was very complicated. I played a journalist and basically did fuck all role playing. But I became friends with the guy while I was at the Canadian guy called Michael, who won almost, and say that in inverted commas, almost every mega game we played a couple, regardless of theme, just by relentlessly following a fairly kind of direct, and he's a lovely guy, but direct policy of self-interest. And he basically completely dismantled the US government in that game by just making it more about how much political capital he could personally accrue than the kind of broadly agreed upon structure of we spend our political capital in order to accrue points in some more nebulous way. He kind of like completely rejected that values-led thing and just made his own bed and effectively destabilized the entire system. And it was brilliant. And it was basically a perfect simulation of an interesting way of rendering politics in a game, even though him doing that kind of broke the game that had been made for him. But I don't think
Tory Simulator 2019,
basically, and it was really interesting to see. Also really interesting that it worked. Also really interesting that the game makers hoped he wouldn't do that, and he did anyway.
That's a lesson about conventions versus hard rules as well, which is
it is. Yeah, point. I hope you don't do this. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of an aside, but
no, that's really interesting.
Like, I feel like that's a way more interesting tension than the kind of traditional video game. Yeah. Oh, but there'll be a trade-off. You can't look after the most vulnerable without, I don't know, every bluebird in the country has died. Like,
yeah, I don't know for sure that that's the way the game is going. It has it has the different advisors talking in your ears, which suggests that it is going to go in that direction, but it may turn out to be something much more complex. I don't think it is, because there's no kind of explicit goal for you to achieve in this game. So I think the way it's going to go is it's just going to tell you an interesting story based on your choices. But
that's not a crime.
I do feel yen for a game that maybe isn't as grim and punishing as Frostpunk, because I do believe that there that good things can happen. And not everything is just making the best possible choices in the worst terrible circumstances. Like, I don't think it's that much of a zero-sum game. The problem you have is that there are people who are playing it as a zero-sum game, and you have to find some way of dealing with them.
Hard to do without really good AI, I think.
Yeah. Oh, so the other game I've been playing is Penko Park.
That's a very satisfying name.
It is. It's also much more. The developer is called Ghost Butter, which is a fucking amazing name.
That's a great name. Who are you going to call? If their tagline as a company isn't "Who you're going to churn" or something, I will work for them and fix it.
But it's definitely much more on my brain's level right now than Suzerain is. Do you know what the word Suzerain means to me, by the way? I don't know if I was just massively ignorant, but it meant nothing to me.
I read it. I looked it up like 6 months ago, and therefore I've forgotten completely. It's a form of government, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like sovereign, but not quite. It's quite complicated, as far as I can tell. So maybe just look it up on Wikipedia rather.
I thought you knew and were going to tell me rather than.
No. Well, I mean, I do sort of know. Shall I give it a go?
Hang on. Yeah, you give it a go. Yes.
And you're going to mark me, are you?
Oh no, I am going to mark you.
I'll be the controller experiment.
I think it can mean two sort of different things depending on the scale. I think sort of in a singular way, as applied to a single ruler, it just sort of means feudal lord to whom a tithe is owed. But if it's applied to statecraft, then I think it means a state that controls another state, but that other state is otherwise basically internally independent, but you kind of nonetheless have a controlling interest in its foreign policy, for example. So I guess at times Britain's relationship to India was as a suzerain, but I only know this from looking up Wikipedia. It was a completely unfamiliar word to me, so I think
that
it's
is
a bit of a strange word to use.
Correct
for a title of a game you hope to sell.
But I think it's a cool word, though.
It's a lovely word, isn't it?
Awesome.
I was hoping that your character would be called Susan Rain, but it isn't. You're called Anton Rain, in fact.
So
but
close.
But it's spelt with a Y. It's spelt with a Y. So it's not. They're not even trying to make it into a pun. Anyway, Penko Park. It's a game about taking photographs. You're on this sort of like on rails safari through this abandoned safari park, which is full of weird creatures. And they're all illustrated by Eleanor Kopka, who's just a fantastic illustrator. Her style is just really instantly recognizable and really sort of creepy cute. And you take pictures of the animals and you get upgrades that allow you to zoom further or alter course or slow your cart or fire globs of pollen at the creatures, which enrages or delights them. So that you can then photograph them in different states, and that's literally all there is to it. But it's really zen and satisfying. It's a bit like Umurangi Generation. I don't know if you played that last year, which is a sort of indie darling, another photography game where you sort of roam around these crummy futuristic environments and you sort of tick things off a list of things to photograph. And I really liked it, but it was a bit janky, and I found that the photographs that you were sort of required to take were often the most boring photographs you could take. Like you had to really get up in the face of an object and take quite a graceless picture of it in order to check it off the list. Whereas I think here, although there's a lot less scope for varied photographs, you don't have filters or other interesting things, and the entire experience is much more controlled because you're literally on rails. But nonetheless, the photographs you end up taking show off the critters' artwork much better. And so somehow, even though it was a lot simpler and a lot less ambitious, I found it weirdly more satisfying, even though, I think of myself as an artistic person. So I'd quite like to take, fancy photographs, but actually just taking photographs that by their nature inevitably neatly framed the creatures was somehow more pleasing to me. Anyway, it's really cute and kooky. And I'm very little chance that I'm going to derail a major economy by playing it. So that's good.
Is it spooky or is it cute?
Cute. It's definitely on the cute side. I mean, it's only passingly kind of spooky.
Cool. Good to know. I think Pip would like this.
Oh
That's
yes,
what
you
I'm
would.
saying.
You definitely, absolutely, definitely a Pip game.
Hmm.
Mm.
Sorry, sometimes I just stop making grunts that you would hear if you clicked on me.
Mm. That's the noise I'd make. Mm. Shall we silence the hell resonance of our own skulls by going to questions from questions?
We can and should do and will, but I understand that you've got some really spicy beef to take up, Marsh. Some real a pretty a pretty contentious bone to pick. A domino spicy beef of a feud on the offing with hang on, what is it with the Nazis?
Oh yeah, not a fan generally, but also
Slow down.
uh, well, it occurred to me when we were talking earlier, or rather, it occurred to me just after we moved on from our discussion of Indiana Jones and Wolfenstein, etc., that one of the things that I latterly have come to dislike about the presentation of the Nazis in both of those fictions is that they pursue occult mysteries and attempt to obtain them. But unlike in reality, those occult mysteries are true. And I think that sort of does a disservice to the fact that these people were fucking idiots. Like the whole thing that is absurd about the fact that the Nazis, promoted fucking in graveyards so that your unborn child would absorb the ghost of a dead hero, and the fact that they thought that the world was the inner core of a larger hollow planet, etc., is because those things are dumb, and they are dumb. But as soon as you say, "Oh no, actually, ghosts are real," then it becomes less dumb, and thus they are less dumb.
Yeah, I guess more like the men who stare at goats. Everyone's seen that film, which is about secret experiments. People who think that they can communicate thoughts with goats and walk through walls, and they do this by concentrating very hard and then just walking into walls. And it persists for the entire film. And the point of the film is these people are idiots. And yeah, that's certainly a lot of Nazi experimentation was like that.
Yeah, it is kind of important because I think, like, not to get real again, God knows, please return me to the trash where my trash is. But, like, a lot of, that kind of fascinating, horrifying, silly, banal, awful fucking footage that the New Yorker got from the Capitol riots. Where that is a lethal violation of decency, and also moment to moment in that footage deeply fucking dumb, and the people perpetrating it are clearly dipshits and are possessed of a particular kind of like wide-eyed dipshittishness that I have seen in other contexts. Not nothing so dramatic nor so terrible or lethal, but nonetheless it's both kind of there's definitely not anything even close to pathos there, but there's something kind of like disarming about how dumb it fucking is at the same time as it being so awful. And sometimes you see that pointed to go like, well, thank God the Nazis of our era are these idiots, because
no, but they were
then
always
they can't
those
be a threat.
idiots.
And that's exactly the point. You go back and it's like, OG German Nazism of the middle of the 20th century is exactly as dumb as if the flat earthers and the anti-vaxxers gained control of the apparatus of state and used it to murder people. It's exactly that awful and that dumb. And so, yeah, you're right. Like, I don't know. And this is the thing. I don't know how you tell a compelling Indiana Jones story with that as its fundamental thesis. Other than like a middle-aged Indiana Jones, like screaming through Germany, holding up an ancient vase, screaming, "It's just a vase." But like,
Like, you get to the end of the game and they open up the Ark of the Covenant, and then Indiana Jones just points in it and says, "Look, it's fucking fuck all. It's just fucking dust.
it's
you
a
twat."
box, you idiots. Yeah, exactly.
Then he blows them up with a rocket launcher.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd enjoy that.
The Nazi is so upset his face melts off. But only...
I'm so wrong.
Exactly.
I've been shadow banned.
Yeah, exactly. Cancelled. Yeah, I don't know how you make compelling fiction about that. I was thinking about that as well, that, you know, like, it's so kind of drab and dumb and conformist to the reality of it, but our fiction always tends to create sort of strident and deeply idiosyncratic Nazi villains, and that is not like the face of that movement at all. So, like, it would be much more accurate for the new Indiana Jones film to be about a man trying to stop the raiding of sites by a bunch of extremely dumb PE teachers.
I tell you what, though, a film that does manage to sort of make the farce of it real and also horribly lethal is, you know, another totalitarian state, but the Death of Stalin. Directed by Mando Iannucci. Because that is an absurd situation for people to find themselves in, and the comedy of it is played up, but it's also, you know, never unshackled from the fact that horrendous crimes were committed against people and humanity at large by those bunch of bozos, basically.
I will say this for machine games, actually, just something that occurred to me is one of the nice things about the Wolfenstein mythos that they set up in their games, and I say this with some caution because I'm not a person who can say whether this is appropriate or not, but one of its, and this is like, I guess, spoilery for the first game, is but it's quite an old game at this point, is that the kind of the sort of occult, it's kind of magic, but more like occult technology that the Nazis are trying to take advantage of is expressly like Hebrew in origin. It's Jewish, and part of the thing they're trying to do is erase the truth of its provenance so that they can claim it. And
I think that's a difficult thing for them to pull off, because it then supposes that the Jews aren't a scapegoat. And that is, I mean, that's the real tragedy of all of these nationalist, ethno-nationalist movements, is that they find scapegoats, and they completely, you know, they disgustingly persecute blameless people. But if you say, oh, but actually this blameless people were really the harbingers of an ancient technology that they coveted and kept for themselves, then you're kind of doing the...
Yeah, I think that is not the tenor they shoot for, but I agree that's kind of a danger of where they end up. Like, it's used, I think the attempt is to expose the hypocrisy with which that kind of racism is leveraged by fascism. But I agree that, like, you know, it's not necessarily... It's the time honored X-Men problem of X-Men being you know, stand-ins or metaphors for a variety of persecuted groups, depending on the time, depending on the storyteller, and depending on the X-Man or X-person, but also actually being dangerous magic people with superpowers that get lots of people killed. And that is, you know, I think there's a storytelling device to leverage there, and I think it can be used to comment on fascism, particularly if your story must have that kind of tropey matinee kind of occult beat at the core of it. But I agree, it's something that's tough to navigate appropriately.
Anyway, I said that we'd avoid the Hell Resonance, but actually I went straight for the ultimate Hell Resonance.
It's all right. I'm just gonna have to eat more grey nuggets after this to make the brain go quiet. But speaking of making the noise inside go shh, Scott writes, "Hi all. In the most recent episode, Tom F. mentioned that he was playing Monster Train while watching the Mission Impossible films, with him actually turning his attention to the films throughout, not just listening. I know the question of what games go well with podcasts the other way around comes up a lot. What games complement watching films on another monitor?" He goes on to make a point about Genshin Impact, saying that the character switching mechanic most reminded me of Dark Cloud on the PS2, similar action-based combat too, and not to spoil things too much, but you definitely do get more elements beyond the starting set later on, winky face. Thanks for years of entertainment, all the best, Scott. So the question there is, what games complement watching films on another monitor? I'm a big weirdo and don't like having more than one monitor, so I can't really answer this.
Sorry, Marsh. My first question is, did he say Heil at the start?
He said, hi all. I appreciate where we were immediately before this.
I was primed to hear that. Sorry, carry on, Marsh.
Yeah, no, that's quite all right.
Just checking.
Thank you for asking me to clarify. I'm glad to do so. He said, hi all.
I do watch films on my laptop whilst I do other things on my actual monitor. And it's I mean, no, the mental state I'm in is interesting in a terrible way, because although I do have like a 0 second attention span now, I find that I need to inundate myself with lots of things that take up my attention simultaneously. Like, I can't really watch a film now unless I also have Twitter and I'm doing something else and maybe drawing at the same time. I don't know why. I think it's probably just to kind of try and exclude parts of my brain that would otherwise try and talk to me and say something that was bad. So in order to do that and suppress normal brain functions, as every healthy person does, I will play something like Noita, which I find I don't play it with any serious intention of doing well in it, but I find it's quite a nice thing to die in abstractly. I also, in fact, I was playing Penko Park in this same vein while watching more of the fucking awful Fast and Furious franchise, because that's just what I do.
You don't have to do it. You don't have to watch it.
I do. I'll disappoint Graham if I don't, and that's the thing I most fear in this world. Teardown also. I just even though and my love for that game is well known, I actually just play it in a more mindless way. Just smashing shit basically whilst watching a film sometimes. I've also been trying to learn Go, but I've completely failed. So
I'll play you a Go. Marsh,
you got to tell me. You got to tell me how it works, because I downloaded a version of it which was quite well reviewed in the Steam store, and it has a tutorial. But then I played my first game, and the AI placed a piece, and all of my pieces instantly disappeared. I have no idea why.
That's not how the game works. What?
That's just deleted all my pieces.
No,
is that not a thing?
No, that's not a thing at all.
Okay. Well, in that case, I don't understand what's going on.
Unless they surrounded all your pieces. That's how you kill pieces.
Well, apparently they must have done, but I don't understand the rules by which that would have been decided to be the case.
Okay.
Anyway, teach me, Tom.
Yes.
Teach me.
Yeah, I'll happily teach anyone Go. It's great.
Yes, we will have to both watch Fast and Furious at the same time, of course.
Oh, yeah. But, we'll do the 3, 2, 1 press play thing. And yeah. Just get it going. Tokyo Drift. Nice.
I can't do this anymore. It's really weird. I have the opposite reaction to lockdown. I can no longer consume multiple kinds of media at the same time. I used to be able to some extent, probably less than most. But now I kind of need the thing I'm currently doing to have ended. I need the clock to ideally have hit like a nice round number of some kind. I'll accept a 10-2, but I prefer a square on the hour. And then I will initiate the new activity and do nothing else, whether it's a film or a TV show or a game. And I do this in the maximum hope of being absorbed into it. Like if I'm listening to like a podcast and playing WoW at the same time, which seems like a perfectly normal thing to do, I find myself getting like squashed in the revolving door of my attention, awkwardly trapped until the security man comes and pries me out of it. So I just can't do it anymore. And so that's my answer to why I can't answer this question.
I'm totally with Marsh in that I just sort of like swarm my brain with stuff. To the point where it obliterates my sense of self for an hour. And that's is it healthy? No. Is it necessary?
We're all chasing it
in the current moment? Yep. So yeah, I find that I played a lot of Diablo 3 while having like a lot of anime on the second screen, which is kind of the lowest of the low, isn't it, of both mediums almost. It's always sort of like matching just the baseline lowest common denominator.
a lot of painted a lot of water more while watching Rick and Morty, so it's fine. There's no judgment in this space.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I've been going through Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is actually a very well made,
That's a good
well
show.
told show. It's very good. While also drawing goblins in a tiny sketchbook. So I guess like we will get by, right? We will get by.
As we continue to answer the question how you live in, we move on to a question about a game. Thank God. This is from Thomas, who writes, "Dear Crib and Crayon, am I doing it right? Yes, you are. You wrote some words. No one's going to judge you. On the most recent episode 354, you talked at length about action RPGs with some focus on Diablo 3. Made me think that I don't think I've ever heard mention of Grim Dawn on the pod. The ARPG at the opposite end of the spectrum to Torchlight. Crate Software have been quietly working away, updating and creating DLC for this game. I think it will both fascinate and frustrate CNC panelists." I don't know how else to describe
We're a panel.
this. So
That makes
exactly.
it sound. That's
You're
posh,
a
isn't it?
panel. Yeah. As it is very mechanically and intricate, but also has issues such as the OTT health regen. Highlights for me are the way each character is a combination of two classes, kind of like Monster Train, and is also tweaked by a constellation of passives and proc skills accessible to all classes. There are meta builds espoused by the community, but I find it's easier than most games to come up with a viable build that is not the meta. For example, most people are making a Kabbalist, a Necromancer, ex-cultist, sounds cool, that use pets, but my build uses none and works fine. So I guess my question is, what do you humans think of Grim Dawn? That's from Thomas, and I believe the answer will come from Thomas.
Hello, I've played Grim Dawn, and it's very good. I like it a lot. I'm not sure why I haven't talked about it, actually. It's a really pretty grimdark action RPG, as described. And I think the dual classing that's described in the question here comes from Titan Quest, which is another brilliant, huge RPG that you could sort of break by dual classing in particular ways. So the question asker might enjoy that as well. It's a bit sunnier. It's an old game, but it's bright and cheerful, and you can summon loads of stuff if you want to. The one thing, the reason I stopped playing Grim Dawn actually was that the starting area is like a giant horseshoe, and this is like the pettiest complaint ever, but I can't fucking stand horseshoe maps. There's something about it like this is true of there's a horseshoe famous Battlefield map that's basically a giant horseshoe with ocean in between two prongs.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I just want to go across. I don't have to. I'm just why can't I go across? Let me go across. And
You're like a magnet.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly. So I was sort of like going to the bottom of the magnet, the bottom of the horseshoe, and I was like, oh, I've got another 10 levels before I can get to the next bit of the horseshoe. Why can't I go across? And that's my main criticism. I'm not actually deep enough into the game to comment on the actual systems themselves and health regen and excessive kind of perhaps boring, grindy things you get into in the later game. But I just want to go across. Come on. And that's what I have to say about it.
Good. Is Grim Dawn the one that looks like it could have been a Warhammer game but isn't?
How do you mean?
Don't you play like a witchfinder looking
like a
dude?
witch hunter and a big pat?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
It just seems quite Warhammery to me, but isn't.
I thought it was. I thought it was a Warhammer game. Is it not?
It's not.
Oh.
It's not.
Well, blow me down.
It's not Grimdark. It's Grim Dawn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The grim darkness is grim darkest before the grim dawn. Fuck. That's all the questions we've got time for, as it happens.
Excellent.
Because the other question we received is directly and specifically for Tom Francis, so much so that we couldn't answer it, even if we momentarily pretended to be him.
If you'd like to send us another question, you can do so at questions@crateandcrowbar.com, or you can tweet us at crateandcrowbar. All these recordings are uploaded as videos to YouTube. You can find other nonsense by us. The address for that is, sensibly enough, youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. And thanks as always to our lovely Patreon backers. You can back us too at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar, or you can simply join our wonderful Discord community. They are lovely. the link for which is on our website, creatingcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis.
I've been Chris Thurston. Please don't tell anyone how I live.
And I've been Tom Senior at Mr. Tom Senior on Twitter, and I've been on a mission to swear less, and that's gone out the window this week. So apologies to anyone who has this on out loud with children around. I'm very sorry.
You don't mean that.
No, I don't.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Well done, America.